Psych with Mike and Brett is now a book. Psych with Mike and Brett, A User's Guide to Being Human, is our new book that's available at Kendall Hunt, Barnes & Noble, and on Amazon. Pick up a copy today and leave a review. Also, find us on YouTube and subscribe to the podcast. That really helps us out. Now, it's time for Psych with Mike and Brett. Welcome into the Psych with Mike and Brett library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan.
I hope you never turn that sound on until I'm ready. Because there are things that I say that I don't want going out to the universe.
It's always on.
Yeah.
I don't always post it.
I appreciate that.
But it's always on.
All right.
Does that make you want to cry?
You know, I don't know that much makes me want to cry. And yet I find that I cry suddenly and more honestly, vividly, than I ever have. But most of my life I never cried. Even in the most traumatic situations, I was removed from it, emotionally blocked off. I mean, somebody's dying, I could be in the room and not be flooded with those emotions, but be paying attention to the other people and trying to take care of them instead of feel it myself. Now, I see a commercial on TV and I cry. I see a dog or a kid and I cry. I just wear it well with tears. I read a book and some emotionally touching thing is being described in the book, and all of a sudden tears run down my cheek. What the hell happened? You know, I'm almost 80, and so I think it's just old age and rheumatism and stuff. But it could be that I'm a more sensitive and evolved person than I once was.
Your eyes are more sensitive than they once were.
You think that's it? It could be the light. I've seen the light and it burned. That's right.
So we have a book out.
We do, and that makes me cry with
joy. We would certainly encourage everybody to go buy the book. It's available at Barnes & Noble, at Kendall Hunt, and at the Amazon website. Those links will be in the show notes. But in the book, I make a case for what I believe to be the relevancy of tears and sadness being the default human emotion rather than fear and
so God says,
anger.
If you need something to cry about, I'll give you something to cry about.
Well, I don't know if God ever said that.
It sounded like a voice of God. It might have been my dad.
It might have been your dad, right. But I am very aware that I've been asking people for all of my career, to answer the phrase, big boys don't cry and fear is a sign of weakness. And everybody can say those things and repeat those things, but then I really challenge them to tell me where those messages come from, and they don't know. And to me, it's a part of the zeitgeist of society that we all know these things, which is a limitation of 50% of the human emotional spectrum. But what we don't really analyze is what are the benefits and costs of those emotional experiences. And the article that I sent you is kind of a less technical version of the argument that I make in the book for the superiority of tears as the default human emotion.
I'm smiling because one of the phrases that I would regularly use with clients when we talk about coping strategies and healing strategies is response ability, the ability to respond with a choice rather than a reaction, a decision rather than a reaction, as opposed to a responsibility, which is a burden. You have this responsibility, you have to pay your taxes. And in the process of doing that, I talk about doing a cost-benefit ratio. Every choice that you make costs and pays.
Right.
And so you have to do emotional economics. You're looking at your emotional state, looking at the consequences of your decision emotionally, not realistically, not objective, like are you going to have any money left at the end of the month? But emotionally, are you going to be in a more or less affordable place because of this decision that you're making? Should I have this conversation with my wife and tell her that I think I'm gay? If you do that, you can't undo that.
You can't unring that bell.
And so it has an emotional cost and it has an emotional benefit. So you have to anticipate, and we can rehearse, we can talk about, we can explore, we can speculate. What if I said that to her? What if I said that first of all to myself? Hey, you know what? I don't want to be this way, but I think I am. And how do I feel about that? How am I going to tell my children? How am I going to tell my boss? Am I going to wear different clothes? Am I going to go to the point of having a surgical operation? Exactly what does that mean for me, and what am I going to do with it? Let's do the cost-benefit ratio. If you choose not to do that, then how does making the choice not to do that play out in your life? Cost benefit. Does something happen to you physically? If you stuff who you are and what you feel, does that come at a cost that you are can afford and are willing to pay? I'll do this over. I'll sacrifice this so that my children have a stable home life before I get a divorce. But in a few years, and I can't tell you how many couples that I've talked to that have said we're staying together for our children's sake. And as soon as they're out of the picture, boy, are we going to go different directions.
Right.
It doesn't always or even often work out that way.
No.
But they often start from that perspective.
Well, because the follow-up question there is, so you're staying together, do you not think that they see the animosity between you?
And
Does
feel
that
it,
not
and how do they
have some
understand
influence
it?
on them?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And very often in many really dysfunctional families, they take on ownership of that. My family's this way, my parents are this way because of some inadequacy in me. And so I need to be a better student, or I need to be a better musician, or I need to be a better athlete, or I need to help mom more at home. Or if I just did these things, then my family would be happy and okay. They'd be a good family. That's really destructive.
So when you talk about this idea of cost-benefit analysis, that's exactly what I think is important applied to these emotional reactions. So when we look at emotions, and I've said for a long time that what we're talking about here are the four primary emotions, the emotions that everybody's born with. So sad, mad, glad, and scared are the four primary emotions. What are the cost benefits and the cost payments that we have to deal with when we have those emotions? So I say there are two emotions that are positive, two emotions that are negative based on the aftermath, the physical aftermath of experiencing them. So if the emotions are glad, mad, sad, and scared, an obvious negative emotion is anger. That is activation of the the sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight. It causes the activation of the HPA, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. Cortisol, adrenaline gets dumped into the system, right? Afterwards, you have the buildup of lactic acid, which generally causes some discomfort and pain in the connective tissue. So generally, most people would say that after they experience anger, physiologically, they're worse off than before. It may be necessary to defend yourself.
It burns.
Yeah.
And they burn out
Right.
energy and capacity.
Right.
Yeah.
So then another negative emotion is fear, which is activation of the same system. So the fight or flight response, right, is fear or anger. Those are both activations of that parasympathetic or that sympathetic nervous system that causes the fight or flight response, that is causing the buildup of these negative stress-related chemicals. That means that both glad and sad must be positive emotions.
So, but also I think it makes the point, the assumption as you're describing it that I'm making is
Right.
those are externally referenced. Internally, there's a cost. If you suppress all of that
Sure.
into your body,
Yes.
then there's a physiological cost of exhaustion and illness that comes, whether it's a high blood pressure and a heart attack,
Right.
Or stomach ulcers, bleeding ulcers, other physiological issues.
Well, because the cost is that your body has now changed physically. If you don't express that emotion in some physical way, then that physical change in your body is now trapped inside your body. And it has to be processed in some way. Either you're going to process it by some physical manifestation
Your body,
of the
yeah.
emotion, or your body's going
I
to
was talking
process
to a
it.
man yesterday who was describing, and he's in his 80s, and he had major heart surgery recently. And when he came out of the surgery, had incredible painful back pain, lower back pain. Had nothing to do with his heart or his heart surgery, he thought. And he kept trying to get the people in the hospital to deal with his back pain, and they kept saying, you have to get your chest healed and your heart healed before we can pay attention to these other things. We're not going to start medicating systems when we don't have your heart stable. And so the way that we want you to do that is you have to get up and walk.
Right.
And you have to take so many steps. And his doctor, after 2 or 3 days of listening to him, finally said, I am not going to have this conversation with you until you take 20 steps, 25 steps. Get up out of your chair and walk.
And
then
when
we
he
can
did,
talk
he
about
felt
it.
better?
He did. And his back stopped hurting. So, I know that's a specific example of what we're talking about here, but I think it is. You internalize these things, and they find a place to go in your body. Your shoulder hurts, your back hurts, your head hurts, something hurts. And I don't know enough to know what that means. I mean, like, what does it mean if it's your shoulder as opposed to your neck or your back? What I know is that's a message from inside you.
Right.
So your suggestion, this article suggests, maybe if you cry, you let it out through tears and let it express itself in tears. Tears inherently don't have to be negative and reprehensible.
Right.
The people around you don't have to say, oh, you weakling son of a gun. I don't want to be around you. I'm going to get divorced because I don't want a man that cries. They can say, come on, let it go. It's okay.
Right.
Pat you on the head and say, it's all right.
And I have dealt with that.
Yeah.
Because I, in the book, talk about that I have trained myself to be what I call a professional crier. So I cry a lot. I cry at
They
least.
hire those for funerals for people that aren't popular.
I did not know that, but
Yeah.
that could be a revenue stream for me that I am not currently tapping
You could
into.
tap into that. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I cry regularly, and when my kids lived with me and were growing up, it was routine that my family would have conversations, actual literal, I'm not even joking, conversations about, can we go to this movie and can we go at a certain time of day? Because
people don't
what's
see
the
Dad
probability?
cry.
Right.
Yeah.
What's the probability that Dad will cry? And will any of my friends be there to see it?
Yeah.
Right. But I believe in crying, and here's why. So we talked about the negative emotions, anger and fear, being activations of the sympathetic nervous system. The positive emotions are activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. So the parasympathetic nervous system is called the rest and digest part of your nervous system. It's designed to return you to homeostasis. So it seems obvious to me that the natural human state should be homeostasis, correct?
Yeah.
And so anything
Of any
that
living organism.
throws us out of homeostasis is bad. So the sympathetic nervous system throws us out of homeostasis. The parasympathetic nervous system returns us to homeostasis. So things like happiness activate both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So mostly the parasympathetic for like joy. But the
So when my
excitement-
father would scream at me, what the hell
Yeah.
are you crying about, boy? I should have said, homeostasis, Dad.
You should have.
Yeah.
And that would have really made him mad, and he would have beaten you. But
Which would help me cry more.
You would have gotten the last laugh because you would have said something that he didn't understand.
Well, he used to say all the time, they'll have to hire mourners for my funeral. Mm-hmm. Sure enough, they did.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it could have been one. Could have been me. I didn't know that was a thing.
Well, if you were around then, I would have sent you a check. But yeah.
So when we have joy, it's activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. When we have the excitement that you feel in anticipation of Christmas Day, that is actually an activation of both the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system.
So then both get triggered at the same time.
Yes.
Okay. So then what happens?
Then you just
Which
have,
one dominates?
Well, the parasympathetic always dominates.
You can't train for it?
No. I mean, you can, but even the CIA tries to train people to.
That's what I was going to say. The Army.
And you can't train that out. We are biologically created so the parasympathetic nervous system always puts us back to homeostasis.
Cheerleaders pump that up. We're going to fight. Let's
Yeah.
go fight the other team.
Right.
2 bits, 4 bits.
Sadness,
Yeah.
tears, are the only human emotion that exclusively operates through the parasympathetic nervous system and cannot operate through the sympathetic nervous system.
You don't cry from happiness?
You do cry from happiness. You cry from joy.
Okay.
Joy will make you cry. Too much frustration will make you cry.
Yeah.
Any emotion
Triggers it.
in overactivation triggers the return to homeostasis through the parasympathetic nervous system, which is expressed in tears.
So you wash away.
And so there are 3 kinds of tears, which you, I think, already know. But there's basal tears, which are the tears that you blink When you blink, you have basal tears.
Like that's dust mote in your eye.
Yeah, well, that's a reactive tear. So you have a basal tear, which are just those are the tears that are in your eyes all the time. They're mostly made of protein and antibiotics, so it helps to fight infections and stuff in your eye.
So my wife has dry eyes sometimes, and they give her little droplets to put in her eyes.
Those are designed to be composed of the elements of what's called basal tears.
Okay.
Then you have reflexive tears, which is, and if you get a mote in your eye, those are just overstimulation of the basal tear lubrication. They may have a little bit more antibiotic component to them to fight if you scratch the cornea or something. But then you have emotional tears. And emotional tears, human beings are the only animals that cry emotional tears. And emotional tears are composed primarily of the elements of stress hormones like prolactin and other stress-related hormones. Humans cry out stress.
So I'm remembering Coco the ape.
Yes.
Became emotionally attached to a doll.
Yeah.
And lost the doll. Mm-hmm. My memory is that ape cried. Am I
Coco's sad. Coco sad.
Okay.
I don't know if the
actual tears.
I don't know.
You would say not because you just said not. Can't.
Well, scientifically, we're told that humans are the only animals that cry emotional tears.
Okay.
Now, could gorillas? I don't know. They're
cry
very
real tears,
close.
Basal tears.
But she certainly expressed.
Yeah, she did.
Sadness.
With side language, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that because I think my dog can get sad, but my dog doesn't cry emotional tears.
Well, but is that anthropomorphism?
It could
we
be.
attribute and assign human feelings to our animals.
It could be.
My dog missed me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think you've seen a dog. You've seen a dog get angry. You've seen a dog get scared.
Yeah.
And we've seen dog gets glad. I think
I've seen what I would call those behaviors. Yeah.
Yeah. But the point being that because sadness is the only emotion that can only exclusively operate through the parasympathetic nervous system, my argument would be that is then therefore the default, or should be the default emotion, because we should always default to a return to homeostasis.
So the article that you sent me, which was from Medical News Today on the benefits of crying, identifies, 8 or 10 benefits. Mm-hmm. Let's run through what those are. The first benefit is it has a soothing effect. Crying actually can make you feel better.
Yes.
Second is it gets support from others. People see you crying and they get triggered to say, oh, poor baby, what's going on?
Now, I actually have a little bit of a reservation about that. So when I'm doing therapy, I encourage people not to try and distract or interrupt a person's emotional reactions.
Yeah.
So if somebody cries in therapy and there's somebody else there, I will actually encourage them not to reach out, because that is your first human reaction, is to want to touch them.
Let them feel it.
But I want them to feel it. Right?
Yeah. Okay. But so what you do is teach them that supportiveness is sitting with it and not taking it away
exactly.
from them. Yeah. All right. So the third one is it helps relieve pain.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth one is it enhances your mood. You actually will feel lighter after you have cried, and when you're finished, if you finish, if you don't get shut off.
Because you're crying out those stress hormones.
Right.
It actually reduces the total amount of stress hormones in the human body.
Well, that's the fifth one. It releases toxins.
Yes.
And it reduces stress. The sixth one is it aids sleep. Sometimes you have a good cry, you can sleep better that night or that time than you would otherwise have done, because you're less likely to have nightmares.
Mm-hmm.
Number 7, it fights bacteria, because it washes out your eyes and your cheeks, and it, keep your hands away. It cleanses that space.
Right.
Number 8, it improves vision. I don't know that I understand that.
Because dry eye, if your eyes get dry, then you can actually get blurred vision.
Mucous membrane from drying out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought you could see more clearly. I can see clearer now.
It just stops your vision from being blurred.
Okay. And then so they're just those 8. I thought there were 10. And then they talk about it in the article.
But one of the primary reasons why you have such a positive experience after crying is because, in addition to it operating through this parasympathetic nervous system, crying actually releases oxytocin and endorphins into your brain. So endorphins are the morphine-like substances that your brain produces naturally, and oxytocin is a very, very powerful pro-social hormone. So when you cry, you actually feel more connected to those around you, and you actually feel better because you get that shot of naturally occurring opioids in your system.
So when, as a father, I would tell my young son, I want you to cry this week, at least once, whether you need to or not. I was actually being a good, loving parent. I wasn't being a harassing SOB.
If you said that, then absolutely.
Well, I did say that to him, but I said it in a threatening and judgmental kind of way, like, well, you are going to cry this week
because I'm going to make you.
I'm unhappy with you. Yeah, I'm going to give you a reason.
Right.
As my dad used to say to me, I'll give you a reason to cry if you need one. Because the alternative, or the counterpoint to that, was you need a reason to cry. And what you're arguing is you don't. It actually is beneficial for you to cry. And culturally, boys need to learn to cry much more readily and available easily than women do, because culturally women are encouraged and allowed, where boys are not.
And so I make this argument in the book that there is this cultural context that is that big boys don't cry. And so I say to people, I have trained myself to be a professional crier, just as I have trained myself to be a professional sleeper, because I believe in those things. I believe in the healthy value of those things. But I also tell people, you have to be aware that there can be consequences.
Yeah.
I go to movie theaters religiously, and I cry there openly.
Yeah.
And I have never been confronted. No man has ever walked up to me and said, I'm going to beat you stupid because you're crying. I know it's made other people uncomfortable.
I'm going to beat you because you're stupid.
Well, whatever, right. But I've never been confronted, but I'm not going to tell you that can't happen.
Yeah.
And so what I tell people is, you have to be aware that this is going to be difficult for other people to see. If you're not ready for that, then maybe you need to think about, I need to start this in the confines of my own home.
Well, we're back to the cost-benefit ratio.
Exactly.
So the cost-benefit ratio for this discussion is, as people leave this podcast today, think about buying our book or hiring Mike to come and cry for you if you have
at funerals. I am available, and my rates are extremely reasonable.
Not only available, you're easy.
Easy.
All right.
Yeah. So if you have questions about this or anything else, please send those to us. As Brett said, we would love for you to buy the book and leave a review. The music that appears in Psych with Mike and Brett is produced and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike and Brett.